I would never say it's not true. I think the most important thing about a memoir or an autobiography is that you get the texture, the spirit of things absolutely right. And the reason I say that a lot of memoir is fiction is because we're remembering what was said at that particular time. I think what it comes down to, sir, is that you have to just be as honest as you possibly can be. You know,
well, to get to your point, that's what I'm saying. I have it all documented with all newspaper articles, all documents, so it's not out of my imagination.
You know what? The facts are uninteresting. The facts are uninteresting. What's interesting is the human heart. Faulkner in his Nobel address said, you know, literature is about the human heart in conflict with itself. And all the facts and figures behind all these other things are not really interesting. But if you have on the page your blood, sweat, and tears, and you put down the contradictions and that are going on within you, then you'll have written a beautiful book that people will want to read, and they will believe you. They really will believe you.
Because the language tells. Usually language tells.
And to just make one more point.
Because people want to believe.
With fictitious persons, one has mostly aesthetic problems, but as far as real people are concerned, then ethical problems present themselves as well.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned earlier the role that the reader's imagination plays in all of this. And I think that's interesting. I mean, I have a young daughter right now who, whenever she hears stories, is always saying, is that a true life story? And she doesn't like it better or worse. It may, if it's scary, matter a little bit if it's true life or not, but it's more just trying to understand what is true life and what is fancy and their comfort zones within that. And I find this interesting because, I mean, some of the really great nonfiction, of course, is memoir, which seems to me to belong to a third category, frankly, from fiction and nonfiction, because it's not reported, documented. It involves this complicated place called memory that's neither perfect fiction nor perfect camera reel documentation. But you think of somebody like Primo Levi and his memoir of Auschwitz and how that's different from a researched or a historical book about Auschwitz, including a researched book that might have 20 or 2,000 testimonies of survivors mixed into them. Because what you're getting is a voice and a language and a sensibility. In fact, in his case, a literary sensibility, where the book, halfway through, goes into a meditation on Dante and returns. And then one of the startling things to me was to learn that this book in Italy was used at one point almost the way people here use Strunk and White to teach basic expository modern Italian style, that it's such a clean, straight form of prose, which of course is not at all how people here respond to it or would come to it in school, never as an example of style. And I find that interesting because this is a book then that's functioning on so many levels, and except that you feel that you're in the hands of a probably fundamentally honest observer, that to the extent that he's calling it a memoir, it's also a memoir in which he himself barely exists. You know, at one point in the second volume, The Truce, his post-war memoir, he gets sick and comes very close to death. And I think I spent as much time mentioning it as he does. He sort of says, then I'm not sure what happened for the next 6 weeks because I was at death's door, period. And he goes back to the stories of the people around him, which is very moving. And it's also striking because at that moment you realize how much that role is a big part of nonfiction. And it's very different, the role of the narrator, when it's not a true life person. And so I think nonfiction writers maybe don't have an advantage in establishing their reality. I think they have a little bit of an advantage, and it often is to their detriment, in the idea that it is a real life story because people sort of take an extra interest in it. You have to imagine it less because it is so.
Do you think this country values it more? Or do you think... Yeah, well, let's just talk about this country. Does this country value it more because it's supposedly true, because it's supposedly happened?
This based on a true story is like an award winning somehow. Wenn man vor einem Jahr die Geschichte eines Afroamerikaners erzählt hätte, der amerikanischer Präsident wird, dann wäre es wahrscheinlich ein kitschiger Roman geworden. Jetzt ist es based on a true story.
Right. It's a whole Frey thing. I mean, if Frey's book...
I just
I
want
don't
to
understand
say what he said that,
I
okay,
like
so
when he said
that's,
right.
it's like almost like a badge of honor that are based on a true story. And if a year or so ago somebody had written about the story of an Afro-American becoming president, it would have been considered a kitschy novel.
And now it's based on a true story.
Unless it was good. But I mean, there's always that problem that being good is just a whole separate, complicated category, I suppose. but no, I think based on a true story, it's a shortcut of a certain kind for a certain aspect of imagination, right? That's when you said earlier you read it for information. You read a true story for information.
But
I mean, if it just, you might read, because it's just like, okay, I'll read this because at least I don't have to wonder
But then
whether it happens.
is it
That,
an
I think-
imaginative failure on the part of the novelist to take a supposedly true story, and is that an act of imaginative failure to take, say, the life of Henry James, Colum
or a
McCann did?
dancer
Or yeah, and okay, I'll be honest. I said in an interview to Atlantic Monthly about 10 years ago that it was an imaginative failure on the behalf of writers that they you know, when they took real people in real life situations and sort of made a fiction out of them. Exactly 2 years later, I started writing a quote-unquote fictionalization of the life of Rudolf Nureyev, the dancer. But part of it was, to me, I started thinking about this and what's going on politically. I believe that a lot of novelists are now taking stuff from quote-unquote real life, the facts that are out there, and reshaping them because we as a people really doubt what we have been told and how we have been presented the story. And that the job of the novelist right now is to put everything in doubt and to say, question who told you this, question why they told you this, question why they sent their kids to war, etc., etc. That it is an artistic response, that we're in the midst of a great age of fictions as an artistic response to how we have been lied to and told what the facts supposedly are.